The college music hall was always a busy place in the late afternoon. Students would come in with their bags hanging from their shoulders, chatting loudly about classes, exams, and the small things that made life exciting or stressful. The old wooden piano stood in the center of the room, slightly scratched from years of use, but still shining under the warm lights. It was the heart of the hall, and everyone, even those who did not play, loved to gather around it. On this day, a group of students had gathered for an informal practice session. The air was full of playful energy as they talked, joked, and lightly argued over who should perform first in their upcoming event. Among them was a cheerful girl who had a habit of laughing before she even finished her sentences. She liked to make small jokes that kept everyone relaxed, especially during stressful weeks. Her friend, who usually tried his best to avoid being put in the spotlight, was practicing a few chords and quietly complaining that he wasn't ready. The girl leaned closer, teasing him with a dramatic sigh. "Oh, please, it's not that serious. Just play something. I promise if you impress me, I'll marry you right away," she said with a chuckle. The others burst into laughter, knowing she didn't mean it. It was just one of those silly lines she threw around without thinking too much. Even the boy laughed, shaking his head, and replying that he would rather avoid both performing and marriage on the same day. While the students were busy joking, an older janitor was sweeping the far side of the hall. He was one of those quiet workers who blended into the background, rarely interrupting anyone or drawing attention to himself. He came in every afternoon to clean the hall, check the chairs, and keep things in order for the events happening later. Most days, he listened to the laughter and music without ever saying a word. He didn't mind it. Watching young people full of energy reminded him of a different time in his own life. He heard the girls' loud joke too, even though he had learned long ago not to react to everything students said. A tiny smile pulled at the corner of his mouth. He focused on sweeping, but his ears picked up every note coming from the piano. The boy sitting at the piano tried to play a short piece, but his fingers kept slipping. The girl clapped her hands together and faked disappointment. "No proposal for you today," she teased. And the whole group laughed again. The janitor continued his slow walk around the room, picking up small pieces of paper, adjusting music stands, and wiping the dust off a row of chairs. He moved with a calmness that came from years of repetition. Even though his job seemed simple to most people, he took pride in doing it well. He never complained. He never asked for anything. He always arrived early and left last, making sure everything looked perfect for the next day. When he reached the corner near the piano, he paused for a moment. He always paused there. The instrument held a special place in his heart, even though no one in the room knew it. He glanced at it briefly before lowering his head and continuing his work. The students were too busy to notice him. They went on comparing their skills, challenging each other to play something new and laughing at mistakes. For them, the hall was a playground filled with creativity and fun. They talked loudly, unaware of how their voices echoed through the hallway. At one point, the girl leaned on the piano, tapping her fingers lightly along the edge. "Come on," she said again, her laughter filling the room. "Anyone who can manage a real tune today will win my heart." "I'm that easy to please," one of the boys joked back. "If that's the prize." I suddenly forgot every chord I ever learned. Again, laughter bounced off the walls. The janitor gently placed a trash bag by the wall, trying not to disturb them. His movements were quiet and respectful, as if he had trained himself to take up the smallest space possible. He had been doing this for years, and most of the students never thought much about him. They didn't know his story or wonder about his past. To them, he was simply there, someone who cleaned the hall, fixed chairs, and made sure things were in order. But he noticed things. He noticed which students worked hard. He noticed who struggled with confidence and who used humor to hide nervousness. He noticed how the piano was the one thing that brought everyone together, no matter what kind of day they had. Most of all, he noticed the way music filled a space with emotions that even words couldn't carry. Every afternoon, after the students left, he would sometimes gently brush his fingers along the side of the piano, almost as if greeting an old friend. But he never played. It had been many years since he touched the keys. Too many things had happened in life, and music was pushed to the side with time. The girl cracked another joke, causing the others to burst into fresh laughter. The janitor found himself smiling again, even if he didn't show it openly. The sound of their laughter, mixed with the faint notes from the piano, filled the room with a warm, youthful energy. It made him think of days, long gone days, when he too had felt that carefree and light dot as the practice went on. The group became louder. One boy tried to play something dramatic, but hit so many wrong notes that the girl pretended to faint in disappointment. Another boy attempted a fast tune, but stopped halfway because he forgot the rest. The room was full of playful failures, and no one felt embarrassed. It was all just fun. All the while, the janitor continued cleaning, quietly stepping around music bags, water bottles, and jackets thrown carelessly on chairs. He had learned a long time ago not to interrupt or scold them. They were young. They were learning. They were still figuring out life. And he understood that. Life had given him enough challenges to know when to stay silent. Still, as he moved closer to the piano, something stirred inside him. It happened often, but today it felt stronger. Maybe it was the girl's joke, or maybe it was the sound of the students struggling to make a melody. Maybe it was simply the closeness to the piano itself. He wasn't sure. He glanced at the keys again as he walked by. For a moment, his steps slowed. His hand twitched slightly, as if it remembered exactly where each note was. But then he turned away and continued wiping down a table. He told himself that those days were in the past, and the present was all he needed to focus on. But memories don't disappear just because a person tries to ignore them. They stay quietly inside, waiting for the right moment to rise. One of the students dropped a stack of sheet papers, and they scattered everywhere. The girl bent down to help pick them up. "You know," she said while gathering the last few pages, "if a stranger walked in right now and played something beautiful, I swear I would marry him on the spot." Her friend laughed. "Be careful saying that. You never know who might take you seriously." She shrugged playfully. "Why not? It would be a good story." No one noticed the janitor stop sweeping for a second. He didn't lift his head, but the sound of their words reached him clearly. Then he continued cleaning, acting as if he hadn't heard anything at all. The students finally settled down after a while. They began discussing which songs they might perform at the event. Some argued that classical pieces were too hard. Others said modern songs weren't meaningful enough. The conversation drifted from music to classes, then to food, then back to music again. Outside the hall, the sun had started to set, and the soft orange light filtered through the windows, giving the room a warm glow. The janitor pushed open the last window to let in some fresh air. The faint evening breeze carried the scent of grass and the distant sounds of students walking across the campus dot. As the group gathered around the piano again, one of them found that a key seemed to be sticking. "Great," the boy groaned, pressing it several times. "Now the piano is acting up too." The others teased him for blaming the piano for his weak playing. The girl laughed again, shaking her head. "No excuses today," she said. The janitor heard the comment and quietly walked over to check the issue. "Sometimes dust gets under the key," he said in a calm, gentle voice. The student stepped aside, letting him lean over the piano. They watched him work with steady hands, tapping lightly and clearing the small space. Within a few seconds, the key moved freely again. "Thank you," the girl said with a friendly smile. He nodded politely and stepped back. ready to return to his cleaning. But before he moved away, his eyes rested on the piano for a moment longer. The bench was right there. The keys were spotless. The room was filled with expectant silence, even though no one had asked him to play. It was just a quiet moment that seemed to invite something he had shut away for years. He hesitated, as if fighting with himself. His hands, rough from work but steady, hovered just above the edge of the piano. For the first time in a long while, the idea of touching the keys did not seem wrong. It felt natural, almost necessary, that the students didn't say anything. They stood quietly, waiting to see what he would do. Even the girl who always joked became still, her eyes fixed on him with curiosity. The janitor breathed in slowly, as if preparing himself for something he hadn't done in years. And then he sat down on the piano bench. He didn't play yet. He simply sat there, letting the weight of the moment settle gently around him. The hall felt different now, quieter, warmer, more expectant. The students leaned in a little, unsure what was happening, but sensing something important. The janitor placed his hands on his lap for a moment, thinking, remembering, feeling a mixture of fear and excitement. He had not played in so well. When the janitor sat quietly on the piano bench, the room felt as if someone had lowered the volume on everything in the world. The students did not speak. They barely moved. They stood in a loose circle around him, surprised, but curious about what he was about to do. Even the girl who had been joking the whole afternoon stayed silent, holding her breath as if she didn't want to disturb the moment. The janitor kept his hands above the keys for a few seconds, unsure if he should play or walk away. It felt strange for him to even sit at the piano after so many years. He had spent most of his adult life sweeping floors, cleaning halls, and fixing broken chairs. But sitting there, that felt like stepping back into a world he had locked away long ago. Before he could touch the keys, memories began rising in his mind, one after another, like soft waves touching the shore. He remembered the first time he ever saw a piano. He had been a boy, maybe 9 or 10, standing outside a small music shop in his old neighborhood. The shop wasn't anything fancy. It had dusty windows and mismatched paint on the walls, but inside was a large piano that looked magical to him. He used to stand outside almost every day, pressing his face against the glass to watch others play. Most of the time, the shop owner would wave at him and let him inside for a few minutes. The owner was a kind man who didn't mind letting curious kids touch the instruments. The janitor remembered placing his tiny fingers on the keys for the first time, feeling something warm spread through his chest. It was the first time anything in life made complete sense to him. His family never had money for lessons. They barely had enough for food some months. But the shop owner gave him small pieces of advice whenever he visited. "Listen to the notes," he used to say. "Let them tell you what they want." And the boy would really listen, as if the piano were speaking a language he somehow already knew. Over time, he taught himself simple melodies. He practiced whenever he got the chance. Sometimes, when the shop owner wasn't busy, he would give him a few minutes to play. Those moments became the happiest memories of his childhood. Years passed, and as he grew older, music became more than just a hobby. It became a quiet dream he kept inside, a dream he didn't share with many people. He would sneak into the school auditorium during lunch breaks just to play for a few minutes. Some teachers noticed him and encouraged him. One teacher even let him borrow a small keyboard during a long winter break so he could practice at home. Even then, life wasn't easy. His family had problems, responsibilities, and financial struggles that he couldn't run away from. But for a while, music was the thing that kept him hopeful. It gave him something to hold on to. He remembered how, in his early 20s, he used to play in small cafes and community events. People didn't know his name, but they remembered his music. Some would ask him to play their favorite melodies. Others would sit quietly with closed eyes, letting the notes wash over them. He loved those moments. He loved seeing how music could change the atmosphere of a whole room. There was a time he thought he might actually become a real musician. Not famous or rich, he didn't care about that, but someone who lived honestly through music. Someone who played because it mattered to him. But life had a way of shifting suddenly. His father fell sick. His younger siblings needed help. Bills piled up faster than he could keep up. The nights he spent playing in cafes became nights he spent at work. The days he practiced became days spent running errands or taking shifts at different jobs just to earn enough. Slowly, his dream slipped out of his hands. Not because he wanted to let it go, but because reality demanded more than he could give. Eventually, he had no choice but to take steady work, any work that offered him security. That was how he ended up becoming a janitor. He never complained, not even once. Life had to move forward, and he accepted that. People often think giving up a dream is a sudden, traumatic moment, but for him, it was quiet. It happened little by little, until one day he simply stopped playing altogether. He told himself it was temporary at first, but years passed, and the piano became something he admired from a distance. Now, sitting on the bench in the college hall, he felt all those memories return, filling him with a strange mix of sadness and warmth. He had lived so many years without touching the keys, always busy surviving, always putting others first. And yet, the piano had never stopped calling to him in small ways. He glanced at the students around him. Their young faces were full of energy and possibility. They had no idea what he had once dreamed of. They only saw the uniform he wore, the broom he carried, the quiet way he moved through the halls. They didn't know the man he had been. But maybe, for a moment, they were about to see a small piece of it. He wasn't planning to impress anyone. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He simply felt something inside him gently urging him to play. Something that had been quiet for a long time, but wasn't gone. He lowered his hands slowly, letting his fingers hover lightly above the keys. Each key felt cold, familiar, and strange all at once. He didn't know what song he would play. He didn't plan a melody. He just trusted the feeling that had guided him when he was young, the same feeling that had made him fall in love with music in the first place. Before he pressed a single note, another memory surfaced. One of the last nights he played in a cafe. The small room had been filled with warm yellow lights. People had gathered around him, listening quietly. He had played a soft tune he created himself, something simple but full of emotion. When he finished, a woman in the audience wiped a tear from her eye. She had walked up to him afterward and said, "You play like someone who has lived through many stories." He never forgot that sentence. It stayed with him even when he stopped playing. It reminded him that music wasn't about perfect notes or fame. It was about sharing a part of yourself. The students watched him carefully, sensing that something meaningful was about to happen. None of them spoke. Even the girl who had made the marriage joke kept her eyes on him, her earlier laughter replaced with quiet respect. The janitor took a slow breath, letting it settle deep in his chest. And in that stillness, he realized something simple but powerful. Playing again wasn't about going back in time. It wasn't about regret or sadness. It was about remembering who he was inside, something he had forgotten but never truly lost. His fingers brushed the first key, creating a soft note that echoed gently through the hall. The sound was small, almost hesitant, but it carried a memory with it. And as the note faded, something opened inside him. He pressed another key, then another, letting the notes form a soft pattern. He wasn't playing a written song. He was playing feelings, old ones, hidden ones, ones he thought he no longer had. The students leaned closer, drawn in by the quiet beginning. The girl folded her hands together, as if afraid to breathe too loudly. The melody grew slowly, each note finding its place. His fingers moved like they remembered everything he had once practiced. There was a softness in the music, but also a depth that came from years of silence. It was the kind of sound that made a person stop and listen, not because it was loud, but because it felt honest out as he played. Memories flashed behind his closed eyes, his first time touching a piano. The dusty music shop, the cafe lights, his father's tired face. His siblings sleeping in the small room they shared, the nights he worked late to support them. The mornings he walked past pianos he wished he could play. He played all of that, not in words, but in notes. The room slowly filled with a warm, emotional sound. The students felt something they couldn't explain, something deeper than they expected from the quiet man who cleaned the hall every day. Some of them felt a lump in their throat without knowing why. The melody rose gently, then softened again, like a story being told without a single word. The janitor didn't rush. He didn't force anything. He let the music guide him, the way he had learned as a young boy. The girl felt her eyes sting with unexpected emotion. She hadn't expected this. None of them had. They had spent the whole day laughing at silly jokes, arguing about who played better, and teasing each other about marriage proposals. But now, standing there, they felt humbled by the man in front of them. The boy who had struggled with the keys earlier felt something change inside him, a mix of admiration and disbelief. He whispered softly, "I didn't know." But even he didn't know what he wanted to say. The janitor continued playing, lost in the music. It was as if the years fell away, and for a moment he wasn't defined by his job or responsibilities. He was simply a man who loved music, a man who had carried a dream quietly in his heart. Even when life took him in another direction, the melody slowly approached its end. He let the last note linger, hanging gently in the air before fading into the stillness of the hall. When he lifted his hands from the keys, the room remained silent for a few seconds, silent in the way people become when they witness something meaningful. And in that silence, the janitor felt something he hadn't felt in years, a small but powerful sense of peace. He opened his eyes slowly, unsure of how the students would react. He hadn't played for applause. He hadn't played for praise. He had played because something inside him finally allowed it. But the students looked at him with wide eyes, soft expressions, and a respect he had never expected. They saw him differently, now not as someone who swept floors, but as someone who... After the janitor finished playing, the room remained quiet in a way none of the students had felt before. It wasn't an awkward silence. It was the kind of silence that happens when people witness something honest, something unexpected, something that touches them without needing to be explained. The janitor slowly stood up from the piano bench, almost as if he wasn't sure he should have sat there in the first place. He brushed his hands along the sides of his uniform, more out of habit than anything else. His face held no pride, no excitement, only a calm expression, as if he had just done something ordinary. But to the students, what he did was far from ordinary. The girl who had been making jokes earlier stepped forward, lightly pressing her fingertips against the edge of the piano, almost to steady herself. She looked at him with soft eyes, the playful spark replaced by something more sincere. "Sir, that was beautiful," she said, her voice lower than usual. The janitor nodded politely, almost embarrassed by the attention. "Thank you," he said simply. His voice was gentle, carrying a quiet humility that made everyone feel even more emotional. The boy, who had been struggling to play earlier, took a step closer. How long have you been playing?" he asked, his tone a mix of awe and curiosity. The janitor hesitated, his eyes drifting toward the piano keys for a brief moment. "A long time ago," he said. "I used to play when I was younger." He didn't add anything else, but the students could sense there was more to the story, much more. They didn't want to push him, but the feeling that they had witnessed something rare made them want to know more about him. The girl held her hands together, almost in awe. "Why did you stop?" she asked softly, careful not to sound rude or intrusive. He took a slow breath, as if choosing the right words. "Life gets busy," he replied. "Sometimes you just do what you must." There was a quiet sadness in his tone, not traumatic or heavy, but real, like someone who had learned to accept the things life had taken from him. For a moment, no one knew what to say. The students looked at one another, trying to process the idea that the man they saw every day sweeping floors, collecting empty bottles, fixing broken chairs, had once been someone who played music with such emotion. The girl brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear and spoke again. "You know, earlier I was joking about marrying anyone who played well." She laughed softly at how silly that sounded now. "But I didn't know someone like you was standing right here." Her words made him smile, just a small, humble smile that lifted the corners of his mouth. "It's all right," he said kindly. "You kids should enjoy yourselves. That's how it should be." His calmness made something tighten in her chest. She couldn't understand why she suddenly felt emotional, but the moment felt different, heavier, more meaningful. It wasn't just about music anymore. It was about realizing that everyone carried a story, some visible, some hidden behind quiet routines. The boy who had dropped his sheet papers earlier spoke again. "Sir," he said, "you played like someone who's been doing it all his life." The janitor shook his head gently. "No," he replied, "not all my life. Just the part one could." Those few words held so much truth that the students didn't know how to respond. They could hear layers beneath his simple sentence streams, responsibilities, sacrifices, and a past they knew nothing about. Another student stepped forward, someone who hadn't said much earlier. "Would you? Could you teach us? Even a little?" he asked shyly. The janitor blinked, surprised. "Teach you?" he repeated. "Just a few things," the boy explained quickly. "Like how you make the music feel so alive. I mean, you don't just play notes. You make them sound like a story." The janitor looked down, almost shy. "Music is a feeling," he said. "It's not something you force. You listen to the notes, and they guide you." "That's exactly what we want to learn," the girl said, her voice brightening with a gentle excitement. He didn't answer right away. He wasn't used to people asking him for guidance. For years, he had moved quietly behind everyone, unnoticed. Now suddenly, these young people were looking at him as if he held something valuable, as if he had something to give. He felt warmth in his chest, the same warmth he used to feel when he played for people many years ago. But he shook his head gently. "I don't know if I can teach," he said softly. "I haven't played in a very long time." "That doesn't matter," the girl replied quickly. "You still have it in you. Anyone can see that." The janitor glanced at her, surprised by the sincerity in her voice. She wasn't teasing now. She wasn't making a joke. She was speaking from her heart, the way people sometimes do when they witness something that changes the way they see the world. He wanted to say no. He really did. A part of him still believed he didn't belong near the piano anymore. That part of him felt like just a worker, someone whose duty was to clean, not teach. But another part of him, the part that woke up when he touched the keys, felt something else. Something like courage. Something like hope. He slowly nodded. "Maybe. I can show you a few things," he said finally. The group lit up instantly. Their faces broke into smiles, their eyes full of excitement. The girl clapped her hands once in pure delight. "Really? You'll teach us?" she asked. "A little," he repeated, smiling softly. "Just a little." The students gathered around him again, forming a loose circle. He sat back down on the piano bench, more comfortably this time. The weight of doubt seemed to lift slightly from his shoulders. He felt more grounded, more present, more like someone he used to be. The girl stood close to the piano, watching him with genuine admiration. She still felt a bit embarrassed about her earlier playful words, but now she only felt grateful to be there. At that moment, witnessing something so unlikely and special, the janitor placed his fingers on the keys again, playing a simple chord. Music, he said quietly, is not about showing off. It's about telling the truth, even if nobody hears it. The students listened carefully, absorbing every word. Everyone starts with simple notes, he continued. But what matters is how you connect them. You have to feel the space between the notes. That's where the story is. He played another few notes, slowly, explaining how each one connected to the next. The students watched closely, leaning in, eager to understand. They weren't laughing anymore. They weren't competing. They were simply learning from someone none of them expected to learn from. The girl stepped forward, placing her hand near the keys, but not touching them. "Can I try?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Go ahead." She sat down beside him, adjusting herself nervously. He showed her how to press a single key, gently, not hard, not rushed, just with intention. She tried, and the soft note echoed through the hall. She smiled shyly. "It sounds so different when you do it." "That's because I'm telling a story with it," he said. "And what story am I telling?" she asked. "You're telling the story of someone who's just beginning," he replied with a small smile. "And that's a beautiful story." Her breath caught for a moment. Touched by the kindness in his words, another student asked if he could try next. And soon they were all taking turns pressing keys, laughing gently, but with a new sense of respect, both for the music and for the man who had reintroduced them to its meaning. The janitor guided each of them patiently, correcting gently, encouraging softly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't judge. He simply taught with the care of someone who truly understood music from the inside. As the practice continued, something magical happened. The room didn't feel like a hall anymore. It felt like a safe space where time slowed down, where people connected through something deeper than words. The girl noticed the expression on the janitor's face. It wasn't sadness anymore. It wasn't tension. It was something like peace, maybe even joy, quiet joy. The kind that grows slowly when someone does something they love. She leaned against the side of the piano, watching him as he corrected another student's hand position. A warm feeling spread through her chest. She had never felt so grateful for a joke she made earlier, even if it had been silly, because without that joke, he might never have sat down. He might never have played. They might never have known the truth about the quiet man who walked the halls every day, and he might never have remembered that his dream was still alive inside him. When the session ended, the sun outside had already set. The warm lights inside the hall made everything feel soft and comforting. The girl took a deep breath and smiled at him. "Thank you," she said gently, "for teaching us and for playing." He nodded quietly, acknowledging her gratitude with a soft expression. "You should play more often," she added. "Not just for us, play for yourself." He didn't know how to answer, but inside his heart, something whispered that maybe she was right. The students slowly gathered their bags, talking softly among themselves, still amazed by what had happened. They left the hall one by one, waving at him with genuine respect. Before leaving, the girl walked up to him again. She gave him the warmest smile of the evening. "And just so you know," she said teasingly but kindly, "if I was serious about that joke earlier, you'd win without even trying." The janitor laughed softly a warm. shy laugh that made her smile grow even brighter. Then she walked out, leaving him standing beside the piano, feeling something he hadn't felt in years. Hope that the hall became quiet again. But this time, the silence felt different. It felt full of music, memories, and the gentle promise of something new. And as the janitor played, the moment the janitor's fingers touched the keys, the whole room changed. It was as if someone had turned down all the background noise of the world and let only the piano breathe. The first notes came out soft and warm, like a quiet whisper from someone who had held their thoughts inside for years. Every student in the hall froze. Some had their mouths slightly open. Some slowly lowered their phones. Others leaned forward without even realizing they were doing it. The girl who had joked earlier stood with one hand over her chest, stunned by what she was hearing. The janitor didn't look at anyone. He didn't check who was watching or waiting. His eyes rested on the piano keys, but it felt like he wasn't really seeing them. He was seeing memories. His shoulders were relaxed, his expression calm, as his hands glided over the keys with a natural grace that none of the students had shown that day. He didn't rush or try to impress. He wasn't performing. He was remembering. The tune he played wasn't something famous. It wasn't one of the classical pieces the students had practiced again and again. It was something personal, simple, deep, and emotional, like a soft story told through sound. The melody moved from gentle to full and warm, then quiet again, as if speaking about joy, loss, hope, and healing all in one flow. A few students exchanged glances, amazed at how someone so quiet, someone they had never once seen near the piano, could make it sound so alive. One student near the back whispered, "He plays better than anyone here." Another agreed, still staring in disbelief. The girl who had made the joke about marriage slowly stepped closer to the piano, not wanting to interrupt. Her smile from earlier was gone, replaced by something softer, something like respect. She didn't know why she felt the urge to say sorry, even though she hadn't really done anything wrong. Maybe it was because she finally realized how casually she had spoken, without knowing who might be listening. Maybe it was because she had judged him without even thinking about it. As the melody continued, it seemed to fill every empty space in the hall. It reached the corners, climbed the walls, and wrapped around the students. It made them feel things they didn't expect to feel on an ordinary afternoon. A few students who had been scrolling on their phones earlier now felt a quiet sting in their eyes, a sense of being humbled. Talent was one thing, but this was experience. It was emotion. It was life. The janitor shifted into a different section of the tune, and his hands moved faster, now still graceful, still steady, but stronger. It felt like someone was telling a story about running through rain, about chasing something, about fighting for a dream that had slipped away. Then, slowly, the melody softened again, like a breath after a long run. The emotion in the room changed with it. There was something about the way he played that made every student feel like they were being told a private message. Some heard hope, some heard regret, some heard comfort, but all of them heard truth. The janitor's posture remained humble. Even when he played a section, it sounded incredibly difficult. He didn't tilt his head back or lift his chin like many performers did. He simply moved with the music as if it had always lived in his hands. His old work shoes pressed lightly against the piano pedals, and the sunlight from the nearby window fell across his face, highlighting the small lines of age and wisdom around his eyes. The piece reached a quiet ending, a long, soft note that floated into silence. And then, nothing. No one moved. No one breathed for a moment. Then, as if someone had snapped a finger, the whole room erupted into applause. Loud, surprised, heartfelt applause that echoed through the hall. Some students clapped above their heads. Some clapped with their hands close to their chest, smiling with disbelief. The girl who had made the joke clapped the loudest, her eyes shining. The janitor looked up slowly, almost startled by the reaction. He offered a shy, almost embarrassed smile and lowered his gaze again. He didn't seem used to applause. He looked like someone who had once been familiar with it, but had long since left it behind. One student called out, "Where did you learn to play like that?" Another added, "That was incredible." The janitor waved a hand gently, as if brushing away the praise. "It was a long time ago," he said in a soft voice. "I used to practice a little when I was young." "A little?" Someone laughed gently. That didn't sound like a little. He shrugged in a modest way, the kind that made the students respect him even more. "Life gets busy," he said. "Sometimes you leave things behind." The girl who had joked stepped forward. She wasn't laughing now. She wasn't being playful. She looked thoughtful, almost nervous, like she wasn't sure how to approach the situation properly. "That was beautiful," she said quietly. "I mean, really beautiful. I didn't know you could play like that." The janitor gave her a polite nod. "Thank you," he replied kindly. She looked down at the floor for a moment before speaking again. "I'm sorry if my joke earlier sounded silly. I didn't mean anything bad. I just didn't know someone like you could." She paused, realizing how wrong that sounded, and quickly added, "I mean, I didn't know you had this kind of talent." He didn't seem offended. He just smiled warmly, the kind of smile that shows someone understands more than they say. "We all have things people don't see," he said gently. "Sometimes even we forget them." His words hit the students harder than the music. It wasn't a lecture. It wasn't a complaint. It was simply truth. The music teacher, who had been in the next room and rushed in when he heard the applause, stood at the back watching everything. He crossed his arms and slowly nodded, as if he had just discovered a hidden treasure right under his nose. One student stepped forward, holding up a phone. "Can we record you playing again?" he asked excitedly, his voice full of admiration. The janitor shook his head with a small laugh. "Oh no, I'm not here to perform. I just wanted to check the key." A soft wave of laughter moved through the room, not mocking laughter, but warm and respectful. "But you didn't just check the key," someone said. "You changed the whole room." The janitor looked down again, almost shy. "Music does that," he said. "It changes people." The girl who had joked earlier took a small step closer to him. "You know, I wasn't serious about the marriage thing," she said lightly, trying to return a bit of humor to ease the mood. "But if I had been, I think you would have won." The room filled with gentle laughter again. Even the janitor chuckled, shaking his head. "No proposals today," he said kindly. "But thank you." His laughter wasn't loud. It wasn't showy. It was soft, honest, the kind that comes from someone who rarely puts themselves in the center of attention. His eyes looked relaxed, now lighter, almost relieved. It seemed like playing had opened a small door inside him, one that he had closed a long time ago. The students started talking among themselves excitedly. Some whispered about how they needed to practice more. Others discussed how wrong they had been to compare themselves so proudly earlier. A few even said they wished he could teach them something someday. The girls stayed near the piano, watching him wipe the keys gently with a cloth to remove any dust he had left. She admired how careful he was, how much respect he showed for something so many of them took for granted. She felt a little embarrassed that she had never even thought to ask his name before. She opened her mouth to speak again, but then closed it. She didn't want to disturb him. She didn't want to say something silly again. Instead, she watched quietly as he stood up slowly, giving the piano one last soft look. It was the look of someone greeting an old friend after many years. The janitor adjusted his cap, picked up his cleaning cart, and started to walk away. The students parted for him, not out of pity, but out of respect. Some nodded. Some thanked him again. Some simply stared, still amazed. Before he reached the door, the girl called out softly, "Wait." He paused and turned slightly. "Will you play again someday?" she asked, her voice hopeful but gentle. He thought for a moment, then gave a small smile. "Maybe," he said quietly, "if the moment is right." And then he walked out of the hall, leaving behind a room full of students who had just learned the value of humility, hidden talent, and the importance of never judging someone too quickly. The sound of his melody still floated in their minds long after he disappeared from sight. It was a moment none of them would forget, a moment that changed the way they looked at him, at music, and even at themselves. When the janitor walked out of the hall that afternoon, the room did not return to normal. Even after he left, the students stood around the piano in silence, trying to process what had just happened. It felt like the whole place had taken a deep breath and was slowly letting it out. The girl who had made the joke earlier stayed the longest, staring at the piano keys as if they suddenly held a new kind of meaning. A few minutes later, the teacher stepped closer to the group. He had heard the last half of the performance and was still stunned. "I've been teaching here for a long time," he said quietly, "and I've never heard someone play like that in this hall." His voice did not carry judgment, only admiration. The students nodded, still unsure what to say. One of the boys whispered, "We didn't even know he could play." Another added, "We never asked." Their words hung in the air like small truths that had been ignored for years. It was strange how someone could work in the same building every day, sweeping floors, taking out trash, fixing small problems. Yet no one ever thought to ask about his life outside those tasks. Not his dreams, not his past, not his talents. The girl walked over to the teacher and asked softly, "Do you think he'll play again?" The teacher smiled a little. "If he wants to," he said. "Sometimes people keep their gifts tucked away, and sometimes life brings them back to the surface when the time is right." His words stayed with the girl for hours. Later that day, when classes were over and the building grew quiet, she walked back to the hall alone. The lights were dim, and the room felt peaceful in a way it hadn't earlier. She sat on the piano bench and let her fingers gently touch the keys, not to play anything grand, but just to feel them. She had practiced for years, yet something about the janitor's playing had touched her in a deeper way than any lesson ever had. She whispered to herself, "Music is not just skill, it's a story." Outside, she heard footsteps. She turned and found the janitor coming back, carrying a small box of cleaning supplies. He paused when he saw her, surprised but not uncomfortable. "Oh," he said softly, "I didn't expect anyone to be here this late." She smiled a little. "I couldn't stop thinking about what you played earlier." He nodded politely and rolled his cart toward the chairs. "I hope the noise didn't disturb you." "It didn't," she said quickly. "It changed something." She hesitated, searching for the right words. "I didn't know someone could make a piano sound like that." He gave a modest smile. "Thank you. It's been many years since I played like that." She looked at him curiously. "Why did you stop?" He paused for a moment, resting both hands on the handle of his cart. "Life," he said softly. "Sometimes it leads you down a different road. You think you'll come back to what you love, but the years pass. Responsibilities grow, and eventually you forget you ever planned to return." His words were simple, but they carried weight. The girl felt her throat tighten a little. "But you still have it," she said gently. "That talent, that heart, it's still inside you." He chuckled lightly. "Maybe it is. Maybe it never left. It just needed a moment." She stood up from the bench. "I meant what I said earlier," she said with a shy smile. "If I had been serious about that joke, you definitely would have won." He laughed softly, shaking his head. "You're kind to say that, but I've lived long enough to know that some things are better left as jokes." She nodded, though a warm feeling still spread through her chest. She wasn't trying to marry him, of course. She just wanted him to know he mattered far more than anyone had ever shown him in that building. They talked for a bit longer. He shared small pieces of his past, how he used to play in tiny cafes with dim lights and warm tea smells, how he would practice late into the night with the hope of someday playing on a real stage. He didn't speak with regret, only with a distant fondness, like someone remembering a friend he once knew well, but had drifted away from. She listened with genuine interest, not just out of curiosity, but because she felt honored that he trusted her enough to share those memories. There was a softness in his voice that made her feel safe, respected, and grounded in the moment. At one point, she said, "I wish the others could hear those stories." He shook his head gently. "The music was enough," he said. "Stories are best saved for those who want to hear them." She smiled. "I do." For a moment, he looked thoughtful, touched even. Then he nodded, as if accepting her quiet appreciation. The conversation paused, and the empty hall suddenly felt full again, not with sound, but with understanding. The next morning, the whole campus was buzzing. Word about the janitor's performance had spread faster than anyone could have expected. Some students were still whispering about it in hallways. Others kept replaying the melody in their minds. A few had even tried to mimic parts of it on their instruments, only to realize it was far more complex than it sounded. The girl walked into the music hall and found several students gathered around the piano, trying to figure out the first few notes of his tune. They didn't come close. The melody wasn't something that could be copied easily. It came from emotion, not technique. When the janitor arrived with his cleaning cart, everyone fell silent. But this time, it wasn't awkward. It wasn't pity. It was respect pure, genuine respect. One student said, "Good morning." Another added, "We were hoping you'd play again." He smiled politely. "I'm not sure I should. This piano belongs to you students." "It belongs to anyone who can make it speak like you did," someone replied. The janitor chuckled softly. "I'm not looking for attention. Yesterday was just a moment of weakness, maybe." "A moment of beauty," the girl corrected gently from behind the group. He turned toward her, recognizing her voice. She smiled warmly at him, and he returned a small but sincere smile. "Would you play again?" Another student asked. "Just once more?" He shook his head. "Not today. Maybe another day. The moment isn't right yet." The students accepted his answer. They didn't pressure him. They didn't beg. They simply nodded and stepped back, giving him space to continue his morning work. But the respect remained in their eyes, following him as he swept, dusted, and organized the room with quiet dedication. Later in the afternoon, when the hall was empty, the janitor paused beside the piano again. He looked at it with gentle eyes, as if it were an old friend waiting patiently. He didn't sit. He didn't play. He just placed his hand on the wooden frame and whispered, "Thank you." Then he returned to his work. As days passed, the story of his performance softened into something like a treasured memory. The students didn't forget, but they didn't treat it like gossip anymore. Instead, they carried it with them, a reminder to be humble, to see people for who they really are, and to never assume a person's abilities based on their job or age. The girl often saw him in the hallways, and each time they exchanged warm smiles. Sometimes they talked for a minute or two, sometimes just a greeting. But every conversation was gentle and genuine, carrying a quiet warmth that stayed with her throughout the day. One afternoon, as she was leaving the building, the janitor called out softly, "Take care of your music." She turned and smiled. "I will," she promised, And play with feeling, he added. Not for applause. Not for praise. Play for yourself. She nodded. Just like you did. He laughed softly. Maybe. That night, she sat at her desk and wrote in her notebook. She wrote about the moment she heard him play, about how it changed the whole room, about how it changed her. She didn't write his name, she didn't need to. She simply wrote, "Never judge a person before you know their story." Some of the quietest people carry the loudest music in their hearts. The next day, she placed the notebook inside her bag, took a deep breath, and walked toward the music hall with new determination. She wasn't going there to impress anyone. She wasn't trying to be the best. She was choosing to play with honesty, the way the janitor had shown her, without ever trying. As she sat down at the piano, she felt more connected to the keys than she ever had before. She began to play not his melody, because that was his story, but one of her own. And as the music filled the room, she felt something shift inside her, like she was finally learning what music truly meant. Somewhere down the hall, sweeping quietly, the janitor paused and smiled to himself. He didn't need to see her playing to know what she had discovered. He had already heard it, long before the first note reached his ears.